Hey everyone, welcome back to Midnight Confessions. I'm David. If you've got a true story that still keeps you up at night, you can send it to us. The submission email is in the description. We feature real experiences from our community, and yours might be next. Tonight's story was sent by Ethan in Los Angeles, California. He wrote about a Halloween he will never forget and about a costume that did not feel like a costume for long. All right, here is Ethan's story. I went into the thrift store because the rain started without warning and because I was tired of feeling invisible. The strip of sunset where it sat was a tired mouth of neon and papered windows, a line of palm trees combing a gray sky with thin fingers. The awning above the door ticked as the drizzle strengthened. Inside, I smelled wet cardboard, old carpet, furniture polish, and the faint sugar of someone's spilled soda from last week. A radio with peeling tape on its speaker pushed out an old song that could not fill the space. I told myself I was hunting for a look to use at the community haunted house. The truth was simpler and less flattering. I wanted to walk out of there with proof that I could be seen. I moved along a narrow aisle labeled with a handwritten sign that said costumes and oddities. The aisle felt like a second spine added to the store, one upholstered with second lives. I passed rubber faces that outlived their jokes, a cracked vampire jaw, a clown grin that had hardened into a grimace, a wolf with one ear permanently bent by heat. A garment bag leaned against the end cap like a sleeping person. The zipper teeth were dull and oxidized, and a paper tag hung from brittle string. It said, "Property of H. Crenshaw, 1978. I ran my thumb over the numbers until the paper warmed. I unzipped the bag. The smell rose first. It was sweet in a way that reminded me of pencil erasers in art rooms, threaded with a colder chemical scent that suggested preservation and laboratories. The suit inside was deep red, like dried blood caught in textured skin, the surface sculpted with ridges and pores. It looked less like clothing and more like a molded body that wanted to be worn. The gloves ended in long black nails with a dull sheen. The headpiece was not a simple mask. It was a crown that flowed down into a face, a structure meant to seat at the base of a skull and finish itself along a throat. One horn was slightly shorter, one eyelid was heavier. The asymmetry gave it the quiet authority that real things have. I felt a pull in my chest that did not feel like curiosity. It felt like recognition. I bought it even though the price made my stomach ache. I carried it through the rain in both arms as if it might try to slip away. I climbed the stairs to my studio above a donut shop, the stairwell filled with warm fryer air and the sweet ghost of old sugar. The apartment's single overhead light cast a steady yellow. I pushed my futon against the wall so the room would have an open center. I laid the suit down and watched it settle like a thing that was comfortable being seen. I told myself I was checking fit so I would not damage it. I knew I was auditioning for a role I had been building in my head for years without a script. The latex slid up my legs cold and close, hugging everything I had starved and trained into shape. The zipper climbed my spine with a sound like breath being pulled into a small mouth. When I drew the head down, the world sank into a soft underwater tone. The edges of my hearing blurred. My breath became a metronome inside the cavity. The eye openings were generous, but the peripheral softened like fog. I lifted my hands and watched longer fingers flex where mine ended. Under the overhead light, the nails held a stubborn line of shine. I stood before my mirror and looked at the face. It did not snarl. It did not posture. It observed with patience, as if it had all night and I did not. The heavier left eyelid gave the expression a skeptical weight. I practiced stillness. I had learned in rooms full of strangers that stillness is not absence. Stillness is a container that other people fill. I felt my throat shape a word and heard it return to me, lower, brushed with the head cavity's echo. It made me feel older than I was and more believable than I had ever felt. I remained in the suit too long that first night, letting my breath fog the eye openings and clear them and fog again. The smell of latex braided with the smells of donuts and old mop water. Memories rose without permission. A high school stage, glue failing on a costume mustache, laughter in the wrong place, the feeling of a laugh landing like a slap. The face in the mirror did not snarl or posture. It observed with patience, as if it had all night and I did not. The heavier left eyelid gave the expression a skeptical weight. I practiced stillness. I had learned in rooms full of strangers that stillness is not absence. Stillness is a container that other people fill. I felt my throat shape a word and heard it return to me lower, brushed with the head cavity's echo. It made me feel older than I was and more believable than I had ever felt. The Sycamore Community Haunted House opened in a converted school gym off Laurel Canyon. The building had that district-issue smell of waxed floors and dust from books nobody opened anymore. Teenagers in grease paint tried to scare one another in the hallways and then pretended they had not. The rooms were squares of plywood set into a maze and lit by bulbs that hummed at different pitches. My station was room 5. It had dingy curtains, fake newspaper clippings on one wall, and a single bare bulb in the center that gave a cone of dirty light. The clippings carried headlines like "Local Man Missing." The typeface had been chosen to look sensational. It worked too well. A back table held a stack of disposable cups and a jug of water. I drank and tried to slow my heart. The suit made my breath sound like an instrument I had just started to learn. When guests came through, they entered believing I was a mannequin. I rewarded the bravery of the first person to step into the middle with a slow tilt of the head. Their breath sharpened. The room grew a boundary. I learned timing within an hour. If I waited and then moved a single degree at the right moment, the body in front of me registered something older than thought. I stayed gentle with younger kids because their fear was thin-skinned and their delight felt like warmth I wanted to keep. I never touched anyone because the rules were clear and because the distance gave me dignity. Somewhere during the first night, I recognized that the suit was learning me. The head seated better with each wear. My jaw found a small lever that turned the mouth's line into something complicated at a distance. I discovered the angle for the heavier left eyelid that read as judgment without cruelty. The bulb hummed and then rose a pitch when the room was about to work. I learned to listen to the hum. It gave me a signal a second before the group began to feel afraid. I started to anticipate the intake of breath, the small step back. The laughter held down because laughter felt cheap in there, and no one wanted to be the person who made it thin. A local paper came through and snapped a photograph of a father placing his arm in front of his family as they realized I was not a prop. The picture caught the line of my jaw and the shape of my shoulders and the way the heavier left eyelid made the face look like it had made up its mind a long time ago. I found the article online the next morning and read my name under the image. The screen light made a pale square on my face. I tried not to look at it more than I needed to. I searched the name on the tag because I could not leave it alone. H. Crenshaw, 1978. The results did not flood. A studio name appeared in old trade listings and then vanished in the 80s. A short piece in a magazine scan mentioned a practical effects designer named Harlan Crenshaw leaving amid allegations of unethical practices. The word unethical lives in my city like mold in damp corners. It can mean anything from billing irregularities to harm. A rumor thread in a forgotten forum referenced a young actor who went missing. Another claimed Crenshaw had an episode and vanished behind a garage and made masks for no one until he died, without an obituary, without a date that would let the world say he had happened. The gaps felt like a design choice. I read through them anyway.
Back in my apartment, I tried the head alone. It slid down more easily, as if it recognized the right angle now. The world went soft around the edges again. The echo lowered my voice in a way that felt earned rather than faked. I placed my hands on either side of the crown and then stopped because a pressure at the base of my skull asked me to keep it on a moment longer. The pressure felt like a palm resting there. Panic arrived bright and not helpful. I made my hands move. When they did, the head gave only after a small weight, like paint that was not quite dry. The reluctance did not present as anger. It felt like disappointment. I placed the head on the table facing away from me. The room took a breath that had nothing to do with air. Halloween came with more people than the fire code liked and a smell of cold smoke and wet leaves, even in a city that does not grow many. The line curled around the block. The gym's warmth felt like a lung that had been waiting for this annual exhale. I took my place in room 5 and listened to the bulb. The hum rose to a higher pitch and stayed there. The groups moved through, slow and bunched. A child in a cardigan stepped toward me and studied the ridge where the throat met the chest. I placed one finger in front of my mouth and created a promise. The mother watched the child and kept a hand ready. The moment felt clean. Later, 3 men entered with the clumsy energy of people who had been drinking and were used to pushing small things out of their way. One leaned close to my face as if daring me to move. The air turned narrow. My hand rose a fraction before I decided that it should. It hovered near his chin. The distance the house required stayed intact, but the suggestion of pressure made his eyes water. I felt a voice move through my throat that did not belong to fear or to performance. The man stepped back, and the room loosened. The bulb's hum jumped upward, then lower again. I held still until the group left, and the pattern reset. Between groups, a red shape passed the open doorway across the hall. It was a demon mask, but the cheap party store kind, glossy and hollow. It drifted by without a human walk and turned just enough that I recognized my own favorite head tilt. It did not enter. It did not need to. The suit on my body and the plastic face in the hall felt like 2 sides of a rumor passing from person to person without losing its shape. Closing time came and made me feel like a string had been cut. I shut my door to take the suit off. I reached for the zipper and found only a continuous surface. My fingers searched skin that was not skin. Panic returned without noise. I pressed at the base of my neck for a seam and found none. The air felt thickening. I kept my body slow because I have learned that panic is a shrinking room and speed shrinks it faster. I tried again and found the same clean, seamless line where a closure had been hours before. I made sounds without words. A friend came in quietly because she had been watching out for me all night, and she understood the situation in fewer seconds than I could have explained it with language. She dusted cornstarch along the collar in soft pats that sounded like ash falling. Her fingers found a place to enter where there had not been space a moment earlier. The pain was sharp and welcome because it belonged to the body I knew. The head peeled last and came away with a long, wet release, followed by sudden absence. The bulb went out, as if the room had completed its thought and no longer needed to speak. The head lay on the corner, with the heavier eyelid doing that small, skeptical droop, a posture that looked like permanent judgment. I felt that the suit had taught me something and expected me to remember. I slept on a couch because being alone felt like holding a door open. At 3 a.m, a line ran through my chest like a string connecting me to an object I could not see. I told myself this was adrenaline and oversensitivity. I stood in a bathroom and checked my face. For a second, my left eyelid hesitated lower than the right. I lifted it with a small flex, and it obeyed. I went back to the couch and listened to wind chimes move without a song. We returned to the gym the next day. The maze had been taken down. The floor where room 5 had stood was a cleaner rectangle of gloss. The fake headlines were stacked in a box with bloodied gauze. A coordinator mentioned an older man with a clipboard and a pass from a dead studio who had arrived late to reclaim a piece for an archive. She did not remember the car. She did remember a name because it matched the tag that had snagged on my thoughts all week, Crenshaw. The information landed in my stomach with a feeling I recognized from other disappointments. It felt like a door closing at the end of a hallway after someone has slipped inside. We ate breakfast at a diner with laminated menus and coffee that tasted like apology. I stared at a receipt from the thrift store when I got home and then placed it in a drawer with wristbands and call sheets and other proofs that I had almost been chosen. In the days after, the hunger behind my ribs sat on the edge of a chair and waited to be acknowledged. I auditioned for a commercial and made it to a final round and lost to someone with a jawline the camera liked more. I walked past the thrift store and did not go in. I made my face neutral in mirrors to see whether any of the suit's residue lingered. I found the head tilt in my shoulders when I was not thinking and corrected it. On a street off Van Nuys, I saw a man walking in a red plastic demon mask, the cheap party store kind, glossy and hollow. It drifted by without a human walk and turned just enough that I recognized my own favored head tilt. It did not enter. It did not need to. The suit on my body and the plastic face in the hall felt like two sides of a rumor passing from person to person without losing its shape. The months after Halloween unfolded the way months do when you are trying to be sensible. I found small work, half days that went nowhere, a late-night background call that felt like being painted into someone else's picture. The suit lived in my head, though it had left the room. The feeling of the bulb's hum sometimes returned in grocery stores or on buses when the air around me changed pressure in a way that suggested attention. I developed a habit of touching the base of my neck on bad days to make sure the skin was only mine. I called it grounding. The habit made the people who loved me feel better, which made me feel better, which made the habit useful and honest. When I slept badly, I dreamed of a square room with fake headlines that briefly gave me true dates before snapping back to their safe lies, and of a seam that never was a seam at all. In one dream, the head sat on a table turned away from me, and I stood behind it and felt something pass between us like a handoff. In another, I waited in the thrift store aisle, and the garment bag unzipped itself without sound and breathed out a stale air that smelled like old work. I woke with the sense that learning had happened but could not be quoted. I thought about the rumor of an archive. I searched for it in ways that kept me honest with myself. Some links loaded into dead ends. Some letters went unanswered. The truth is also that part of me tried to plan a way to stand at a respectful distance and still be chosen again. I held both truths and tried to live without lying to either.
1. On Thanksgiving, I ate with a friend and 3 strangers at a table that had a surface like a school desk. Someone brought out kids' drawings from a box and spread them like placemats. The drawings had pumpkins and bent trees and night skies and purple crayon. I felt a small ache at the sight of imperfect stars. That night, I slept well and did not dream, which felt like a favor. In December, the local paper ran a small retrospective on the haunted house. The photo with my name appeared again. The caption called the room a fan favorite. The article did not mention that a piece had been reclaimed. It did not mention that the room had felt like an instrument whose single string could be tuned higher than was healthy. The world does not need to know every truth to function. I cut the article and placed it with the first one. I told myself I would throw them away when it felt right. I did not set a date. The mind likes deadlines until it does not. Some afternoons, months later, I still felt a line go taut from somewhere behind my sternum. The tautness usually meant nothing. Sometimes it aligned with a memory of standing very still and letting other people project themselves into me for a living. I learned to breathe through those moments the way people do after a scare, when their body forgets to come back down. I learned to notice when my left eyelid hesitated and to choose how to hold my face. I learned that choosing is a skill you can train the same way you train any other muscle. Training does not remove danger, but it does make room for better decisions. I think about the man with the clipboard. I think about how the coordinator remembered his authority more than his face. Authority leaves a stronger impression than bone structure. I think about how easy it would have been for anyone who knew the right posture to walk in and claim what belonged to a dead studio, because the world respects a certain tone and a laminated pass. I think about how many times I have used a certain tone to be treated like I belonged in a room.
The thoughts do not feel like punishment. They feel like a ledger I am allowed to read now. I also think about the girl in the cardigan who stared at the seam where throat met chest with awe instead of fear. There was a generosity in her attention that I try to practice when I watch other people work. There was a caution in her mother's hand that I try to practice on myself. If I am going to keep living here, I need both. When the Santa Ana winds pushed hot air through the canyons and made the sky look bleached in January, I walked past a party store. In the window, a red plastic demon mask hung among leftover New Year's hats. The mask's eye openings were cut without craft. The plastic would pinch. The strap would snap after a week. The mask still held an outline that the world recognizes before language. I stood there for a minute and watched my own reflection in the window glass overlap with that empty face. For a second, my left eyelid felt heavy. I raised it, and it obeyed. I walked on without buying anything. In February, I took a job as a standardized patient at a medical school, memorizing symptom checklists and letting students practice their questions. The work required stillness and contained emotion and a clear line between what is felt and what is presented. The rooms were white and smelled like alcohol pads. The suits were cotton gowns that tied badly. The lighting hummed at its own pitch, different from the haunted house and less forgiving. I learned to hold my breath just enough to keep a pain believable. I learned to release that breath without carrying it home. These are small skills. They stack. In March, I opened the drawer with the thrift store receipt and the clippings and took them out one by one. I felt the same nerves every actor feels when holding pieces of paper that try to prove anything. I did not throw them away. I put them in a different folder, marked with a neutral word, and slid it onto a shelf. The act did nothing to the past. It did something to the way the room felt. That was enough. Every morning, I shave and check the left eyelid without ritual, like checking a door before leaving. Most days it behaves. On the days it does not, I take a breath and choose how to hold my face. I tell myself, that choice is a seam I can keep visible even when other seams go smooth. I have not seen the man in the red plastic mask again. On certain blocks, I still look up at the right moment to catch a shape turning a corner with economy and purpose. It is almost certainly someone else. The city repeats figures the way it repeats rumors. I do not follow. That choice feels like a line drawn with a dull pencil. It is not dramatic. It is clear enough. People ask about the haunted house because they want to hear a simple story with a sharp edge. I give them the clean version most days. Sometimes, when the light is right and the room is kind, I include one extra detail, like the way the bulb's hum could predict a scare by a heartbeat. People like that. It feels like the truth without inviting too much of it. On Halloween now, I light a candle and open the window and let the air move through the apartment the way air likes to. I listen to distant laughter and think about a square room that no longer exists, but exists enough in me. I keep enough distance to be a person and enough nearness to be honest about what wants to live inside the rooms I build. Some years that balance will not be exact. I expect the shape to wobble. I plan to check it often. I still think about the suit. I think about the way it learned the angle of my head and the weight of my eyelid and tried to keep what it had learned. I consider what it means when an object refuses to be just an object. I consider what it means when a person builds a container so well that it wants to be filled forever. I decide not to be angry at the shape of that desire because anger would be a kind of glue. I decide to be precise instead. If you looked at me now, you might say nothing had changed. That would be wrong and also understandable. The change is in the way I recognize rooms. I know which ones hum at the wrong pitch. I know which ones are safe to stand still in. I know how to step away without making a scene. I know how to let a door shut behind me without listening for footsteps. I know how to write a story in my head about a costume that wore me, and how to read that story back as a lesson instead of a curse. Most days, that is enough. On the days when it is not, I stand before the mirror and check my eyelid. If it hesitates, I correct it gently.
I speak aloud without using my voice to shape anything other than the plainest words in the plainest tone. I watch my face return to me with the patience of a person who has time. Then I go outside and walk under trees that make the sky look like a net, and I let myself be seen by dogs and birds and people who are not thinking about me at all. I let that ordinary invisibility feel like freedom instead of failure. I let the day be a day. I let the night arrive without ceremony. I sleep, most